Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here. In this update, we are watching a powerful storm system off the west coast. You can see the high levels of water vapor content it's going to bring with it. That's going to be the culprit of very heavy rain going to impact the west coast. It's going to traverse across the southwest through the southern plains all the way into the southeast up into the Carolinas, and then there's going to be an even stronger one that's going to be shaping up for early next week that definitely promises to even be bigger than what's to come in the week ahead. So I appreciate all my subscribers out there. If you are new here, I put out a lot of content pretty much on a daily basis throughout 2024. So if you are new, hit the subscribe button and follow along so I can keep you well ahead of the storm. So let's really dive into this and what's happening this week. Really, the main player is going to be off the west coast. We're going to be watching a series of low pressure centers with a lot of high water vapor content values with it, as the ridge of high pressure is going to be locked over our northern tiers, kind of forming more of like a Rex blocking. So it's going to be traversing across, and the downsloping wind is going to be moving off the west coast. That is the system that's going to be diving into the southwest, bringing some mountain snows and some heavier rainfall in its wake. But it's also going to get its act together once it reaches into portions of Texas, through the southeast, and traversing up through portions of the Carolinas as well. And then, yes, we're going to have another system that's going to be even trailing behind that one. So let's really break this thing down for you. Here's the setup for tomorrow. This all gets its act together, complements of this low pressure center, and we've already got flood watches in place across northern California into Oregon. They're expecting some very heavy rainfall in and around the Bay Area. But that is the main system that we'll be watching. Notice the blue line, as most of the colder air is be bottled up well to the north. That's the complements of that Rex blocking that ridge of high pressure, and everything's going to be traversing outside of that. And underneath that, that's where all the instability will be. So if we take a look at the overall surface map heading into tomorrow, there's the first initial system with that heavy rain bands coming ashore off the west coast, and this is why they do have the flood watches in place. And this likely is going to be a significant event for a good part of California, but not just them. That's going to be moving into a good portions of the Four Corners region with very heavy rainfall as well. So by the time we head in tomorrow, that system in Northern California will be dropping down into Southern California. So those places into Santa Barbara, into Oxnard, back into Los Angeles, into Long Beach, even all the way down into San Diego. That's the area that got hit hard just a couple of weeks ago. We are expecting more heavy rain across these regions. So definitely be on high alert. This looks to be a fairly significant event. I'm really kind of worried about the one next week, because that looks to be even more potent of what's to come in with this particular system. So if we look at going into Friday, here's the overall setup as as it continues to moving from west to east. You can see these kind of like looking like ribs. Those are just kind of bands of waves of precipitation that pushes some higher winds out ahead of it. And that's once it taps into some of that Gulf moisture here, that's when it's going to start raining again for those places in Oklahoma, into portions of Texas. But in its wake behind it, we are going to be looking at some heavy mountain snows in its wake. But look at what's to come. We've got another one going to be making landfall, and this is the one I'm really concerned about as we head into early next week. That looks to be really potent and cause some devastating flooding potentially for the west coast. So we're going to go over all those details, but we're going to break it down one by one. So right now, first and foremost, this is the Thursday event. This is the first initial storm that's going to bring all the heavy rainfall by the time we head into that Thursday night time frame, all the way through the entire state of California. Those areas in Southern California, that's when you're looking at for 1 to 2 inches of rain with this system. That's going to bleed into portions of Nevada, into Utah, back into Arizona. And then we'll be looking into that Friday time frame. Once it traverses across and gets close enough to tap into some of that Gulf moisture, that's when it's going to start raining again. I mean, those places in Dallas and Austin and Victoria into Houston. I was actually just reading some of those areas. Victoria, all-time wettest January on record. Houston, Austin, some of these places in Beaumont, top 5 wettest Januaries on record. Lake Charles, remember, you were just in a desperate drought. You picked up 11 inches already in January. So you got a lot more heavy rain to come over the next 2 weeks. But yes, it's going to be tapping into, some of that colder air that's actually been trapped up there in Alaska. That's going to be pulling off the West Coast, mainly being along into that West Coast because you got the ridging further up into the Northeast. But it is going to be cold enough to start snowing again into the mountain regions of Idaho, back into Utah, but especially into Wyoming and getting into Colorado. So that definitely does include those areas into Colorado Springs, as well as into Denver region, as that leading edge will be shifting into Oklahoma by then and back into Texas with more heavy rain. But even deepens as we get into that Saturday time frame back into East Texas. Notice the darker greens again. This is the area that get really hit hard into Beaumont, those areas in East Texas. Unfortunately, you got more heavy rain coming with this particular setup. And the train doesn't end there because this looks to be relentless as the El Nino looks to come on full throttle, especially for that southern corridor. But the leading edge of it heading into that Sunday time frame is going to be setting up across East Texas through Arizona, through Arkansas here, back into Louisiana, into Mississippi, as well as into Alabama, getting into the Florida Panhandle. Notice it's diving more or less east-southeastward. It's backing away from that ridge because you got ridging over the top. Storms don't like high pressure and drier air, so it's going to feed off that moisture content closer to the Gulf, and that's where most of the instability would lie. And some of that could be on the severe side. I'm not terribly too concerned about these getting too far out of hand, but they definitely could contain some gusty winds, and you could have some surprises. Remember last week in Southeast Texas, they had some pretty significant hail in some isolated parts down there. I think Newton was one of the ones that picked up like golf ball, even baseball size hail I saw out there. So yeah, don't let your guard down because, we've got some colder air aloft. We got some higher dew points with this instability. So yes, we could have some surprises with some larger hail that's coming out of this system, as we go into that, Friday, Saturday, and head in that Sunday time frame. So in Sunday, that's going to be mainly trapped over the southeast, where that low pressure is really going to be, heavily impacting those areas across the southeast back into the Florida region. But notice what's lurking, right? Here's that other storm that's off the West Coast. That is going to be the even bigger deal heading into next week with all those saturated soils. Actually, right now, the entire state of California is not even actually in a drought. So they don't really need the rainfall technically, but they're going to get it in a big way with a lot more precipitation heading their way because there's got to be just a series of low pressure centers. So this is the map for Monday, February the 5th time frame. So we got the first system going to be hanging out by the southeast again into Florida, trying to get up there into the Carolinas with a little bit of a colder air that's still there, but further north it's all about the warmer temperatures and even some record high temperatures for those areas. But then all eyes will be on this system, 982 low pressure center, really getting its act together, and that's the one that's going to bring even more significant rain, significant snows, and significant winds when it moves inland. So here's the breakdown for that first initial setup. There's been a lot of talk about, hey, could we get some snow in the southeast into the Carolinas? It's not great, but I mean, it could happen. There's 20, 30% of a probability back into Asheville, into Greenville, into Charlotte, some of those areas. This would be Monday time frame. If there's definitely enough colder air there into that morning time frame, we might sneak out some snow showers across this region. So it's not zero, but it definitely doesn't look to be like a significant event. for that going into Monday. But yeah, here's the setup for next week. And like I mentioned, this jet stream is going to be alive and well. You can see it's just a conveyor belt of moisture right along this subtropical jet. This is El Nino all day long, but that's going to be pulling out all that abundance amount of moisture back into from the Pacific Ocean. So you can see where Hawaii is. A lot of times sometimes they call these, pineapple expresses. Sometimes they call these atmospheric rivers, and they call them atmospheric rivers because tend to be the more significant type of event. And there's different levels of these, and all atmospheric rivers is just kind of a thin, narrow banding of water vapor content that moves inland, and that's exactly what is going to happen. So if we show you kind of the setup and what that may look like, some of the science behind what was often referred to as an atmospheric river. So basically you got kind of a narrow band. I showed you that narrow band of moisture out there in the Pacific Ocean. That's very high water content value. So as this moves inland and it sweeps over some of the mountain ranges, that water vapor rises, but it cools and creates some of that heavier precipitation. So that's exactly what happens. And some of these stronger events, that could be 7.5, even 15 times the average flow of the water of the mouth of the Mississippi River. So these are very intense, narrow bands of increased instability. And they call it an atmospheric river because it's a more significant event that just says, hey, this could be not just your average low pressure, but it has a band of very heavy, high water content value associated with it, which obviously could lead to very heavy rain, very heavy flooding with it, and sometimes mudslides, and even some of the bigger events could cause catastrophic damage to life and property. So that's why these can be more significant, but they can lead to, on average, 30 to 50% of just their annual water supply off there in the West Coast. So they look forward to these, but sometimes they come in too fast, too strong, and they can cause some devastating flooding. And I think that's exactly what could unfold as we go into early part of next week. So you got that initial stage. Remember, those areas are already not in a drought. So you got all that first push of what's going to occur this week. But then the second system, talks about it's going to be even stronger. And it's not just a one-day wonder. This could last over 3 to 4 days. So that's right. Right now, the Climate Prediction Center is already calling for, there's a high risk for excessive flooding from that February 6th through that February 9th timeframe into Southern California, through the Southwest into Arizona here. So these are the areas that, technically don't get that much rain. Remember, San Diego picked up 3 inches, and that was enough. That was extreme flooding for them. So we're not talking like heavy rainfall like what they used to in, say, Lake Charles. These areas can't handle it out here. Some places like in Yuma only get a couple of inches for the entire year. So yes, these areas are going to get hit hard coming in from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week, especially along the West Coast, and that is going to be moving inland. But look what happens further in. You're tapping into outside of that ridge, right? So you've got more heavy rain in a lot of the same areas: Southeast Texas, Louisiana, into Arkansas, into Mississippi, into Alabama, back into Georgia, through the Tennessee area. That's on February the 8th through the 12th time frame. So as that same system will be moving off, we'll be also tapping into the Gulf moisture into the southeast, but it's also going to bring in the higher elevations all the heavy snows with it. So you got the rain on the southern flank, and then you have high, heavy snow across these regions in Nevada, through Utah, into Arizona. Flagstaff, I think, is going to get crushed with this system, with very intense heavy rainfall. You're going to be piling up in feet out there. But the snow is going to be, tapping in. Remember, I told you it's a step down process coming in from Alaska, some of that colder air. So by the time we get to that end of that first week, heading into that second week of February, that colder air will start to shift a little bit from west to east, and now start including some of those areas into Wyoming, back into Nebraska, into the Dakotas, through Iowa again, tapping into some of that colder air with the increased rainfall. will be transferring to snow in those regions. But look at the high winds, right? These also bring very high winds. So on top of the heavy rain, the heavy snow, it's also going to be bringing that higher winds, especially where it comes ashore into Southern California, through Arizona, through New Mexico, but really this whole corridor through the Southwest and through the Southern Plains, through that 6th and 12th time frame. That is going to be a windy week, complements of that atmospheric river that will be moving ashore. And here's some of the snowfall it's going to bring in its wake. So you got most of the snow in the Sierras, through the Cascades, through the Intermountain West, through those Flagstaff regions. Very heavy snow through the mountain ranges back into Colorado, through Denver, through Colorado Springs. But notice this, this is where the ridge is, right? So there's not much snow, underneath that ridge, but the very heavy rain, just even on the blended models, kind of showed you that over the next 7 to 10 days. Look at California just being lit up. And the concerns are, a lot of these totals are 6, 8, 10, 12 inches of rain right along the coast here. So we are expecting a significant event. It starts to get going actually tomorrow, builds through this weekend, and then the more significant event comes in Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week for the West Coast. And then we'll also have to be dealing with heavy rains across the Southeast, as well as those areas will be setting up across mainly East Texas into Eastern Oklahoma, through Arkansas, back into Louisiana, into Mississippi, through the Southeast again, trying to sneak up into the Carolinas. But notice where the dry slot is, where that ridge of high pressure will be. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update where I protect you before and after the storm.